JetBlue reported their third quarter financial results today, and they missed analyst estimates by quite a bit. The loss was greater than had been expected. And then on top of that, they said, well, the fourth quarter is actually going to be worse than analysts expect, as well as the full year in terms of earnings losses. And so I think that was much worse than anybody had expected. Some of the others, mid-sized airlines, had been talking about this excess capacity, cutting of fares to try to fill the planes. But I think JetBlue, just in general, surprised everybody by the depth of the negative impact on their financials.
Is it basically because of stuff going on here at U.S. airports and U.S. demand specifically?
Yeah, it really is. The larger carriers that have global networks reported record revenues and profits for the quarter and expect to do so for the full year. But airlines that are focused on the domestic market, the problem that they're having is they put too much capacity into those markets. Now demand is sliding, it's weakening, especially on days of the week or weeks during the fall that people don't generally travel. It's gotten worse. And so Spirit even said, hey, even the traditional build up in fares and demand before the holidays, we're not seeing that this year.
Interesting. Hey, also with us is Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Aerospace, Defense, and Airlines Analyst George Ferguson from our BI headquarters in Princeton, New Jersey. George, come on in on the conversation. What really jumped out for you at JetBlue? We've talked a little bit about these too many seats, staggering delays, the impact of the domestic U.S. market on JetBlue. But what for you was really dramatic here?
I mean, I think the yield declines, was what stuck out the most to me. I think it was around 13% yield decline. I think I was catching the end of what Mary was saying there, but I think the undertones I heard was all about leisure demand and the problems around leisure demand. I think a lot of the airlines are just pointing too much of their capacity at similar places right now, because there's only so many leisure destinations, and I think that's having a pretty big effect as well, because I think business just hasn't come back as much as everyone had hoped, and I think that's part of the problem with profitability in New York for them.
And George, analysts have cautioned that airlines may have overdone it by adding U.S. flights this year. How much does that play into it when it comes to JetBlue specifically?
Well, I mean, JetBlue, a very domestic U.S. focused airline. There's a bit of Caribbean in it, and they're trying to expand into Western Europe, but that's very small right now. So whatever is affecting the domestic market, it's going to be really, really, really hard for JetBlue to avoid. I did think it was also interesting they talked about trying to pivot more into Europe, especially here during the winter season. I kind of feel like the European bounce might be over. I think flyers were willing to pay almost anything it took to get to Europe this summer because they had a hankering. They hadn't been there for a while. But I feel like that pandemic frenzy, if you will, is probably done next summer. And so I feel like any pivot there may be a bit too late.
It's like chasing returns in a stock market. You know what I want to ask both of you? I feel like for such a long time, we all lauded JetBlue. They weren't, they didn't have overhang from some of the legacy carriers in terms of either worker costs, unions. They had new planes. Like there were all these, kind of wonderful things playing in their favor. Mary, is some of what's going on with JetBlue is that they themselves are becoming more of a legacy carrier, and it just maybe, or their specific business approach just doesn't play as well?
Well, they do have some unions on their property now, and so they did call out labor cost increases as part of the problem this quarter, as well as fuel cost increases with the price of jet fuel going up. But, and they don't operate an exact hub and spoke system like some of the bigger airlines do, but they do have focus cities that they concentrate a lot of their flights out of, New York being one, Boston being another. And so, they also called out ATC, air traffic control delays in the New York area, which is one of the biggest or the biggest aviation market in the country. And so there have been some restrictions on flying put in place there that JetBlue said they expect to last all the way through the end of next year.
Yeah, which always kind of freaks me out. I just want to get George, though, to weigh in on this whole idea of, that JetBlue, right, was so different from the legacy carriers. There's a lot that's gone on, though, since JetBlue first hit the runways. What's your take on that, maybe some of what they're doing it maybe needs a freshening up, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard, right? Because the pilots, for example, In the past, if you're a smaller airline, maybe you could get away with paying your pilots a little bit less. But in a world now where we feel like we're constrained by pilots, and you're recruiting, you need to push those salaries up as well. To recruit flight crew and keep them in your them in your airline. I mean, we're hearing hopping from pilots that was unheard of, a decade or two ago, where even they get into a pilot job at a low-cost carrier, and then they'll hop again, right, and to a major like Delta, American, United. Seniority is everything in the pilot business. So when you get your job, you get a seniority number. As you climb the ladder, you can bid on better trips. You can make your life easier based on that. So pilots traditionally hadn't moved. So I think JetBlue, as we find ourselves constrained by things like pilots, as they get larger, the work groups also want more pay commensurate with what the larger airlines in the country have. And so, yeah, I think it's a difficult industry, I think, for carving out a special place for your labor costs or anything else now. It's hard.
Hey, Mary, how does this impact the outlook for ticket prices during the holidays?
Well, some of the carriers are saying that they believe demand is going to come back in the fourth quarter. And of course, if that happens, and there's not too much capacity out there, then fares could rise as they traditionally do. In fact, I had some information from Hopper last week that said they do expect fares to rise as we get closer to the holidays. People, even though they may have been focusing on European travel over the summer, that when it comes to the winter holidays, they want to be home and they want to be with family. And so if that's correct and demand rises, then prices are probably going to rise as well.
Hey, George, JetBlue, Spirit, is that going to happen?
And the stock price of Spirit doesn't seem to indicate that, right? And so, look, we hear a lot of chatter in the marketplace, right? There's a lot of challenges to this deal, right? Not the least of which raising $3 to $4 billion right now. I mean, if you even look at the prices that companies are raising debt to buy airplanes, if you look at the United EETC deal, that's almost a 7% yield to worst. So that kind of insinuates that would be the cost to raise money for airplanes right now. It gets expensive to raise, those large numbers at those percentage rates and make the whole thing work. The market is different too. We look like there's too much capacity, so it feels like capacity needs to come out. How much do you want to pay up for, for more airplanes and more capacity? I don't know. It's a rough backdrop for that deal right now.